a wealthy man long resigned to a childless life, was stunned to discover abandoned triplets crying in the grandeur of his mansion. As Matthew Jones Coleman approached the basket, his breath caught each child bore a striking resemblance to him. The moment sent a shockwave through his orderly world, leaving him both awestruck and bewildered. Far from the opulence of the Matthew Mansion in San Francisco, Sarah Evans Holland was locked in a battle of willpower on a quiet stretch of road. She cut an arresting figure, her fiery red leather miniskirt and platform heels gleaming under the relentless sun. With every ounce of strength, she pushed against her ancient white Volkswagen Beetle. The car, stubborn as a mule, groaned weakly in protest before refusing to move another inch. "Damn it," Sarah muttered under her breath, frustration and exhaustion clawing at her resolve. Her palms pressed firmly against the hot metal of the Beetle, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She stood still for a moment, letting the oppressive heat and her own determination settle over her like a heavy blanket. In that pause, a thought crept into her mind, a quiet reflection born of the struggle. "It's not the weight of the car that saps your strength," she mused. "It's the unyielding resistance of the road and the isolation of pushing alone. Yet there's a kind of dignity in the fight, a beauty in refusing to quit." The low, throaty growl of an approaching engine broke through her reverie. A sleek green Aston Martin Vantage V8 gilded effortlessly to a stop beside her. The tinted window slid down smoothly, revealing a man whose presence could only be described as cultivated perfection. His impeccably styled hair framed a face partially concealed by dark sunglasses, and a faint smirk curved his lips, radiating both confidence and condescension. Feeling lucky, he quipped, his voice laced with amusement. "Think a little spinach might turn you into Popeye." His chuckle, calculated and sharp, carried the weight of his bemusement. Sarah turned her head slowly, her piercing gaze slicing through his self-assured demeanor. "And what about you? Here to inspire me with your motivational one-liners, or just to flaunt your fancy toy while I burn calories? Much obliged, Car of the Year." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed, and casually swung his car into park. With an almost theatrical grace, he stepped out. His crisp, tailored shirt clung perfectly to his broad frame, giving the impression it had been ironed directly onto him. "Well," he began, flashing a grin that teetered between charming and smug, "today's your lucky day. Clearly mechanics aren't your specialty. Allow me, a modern gentleman, to save you, and maybe your heels from more punishment." Sarah crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she assessed him. A biting smile tugged at her lips. "Oh, what a blessing. Nothing beats a chivalrous reminder of my ineptitude, delivered by a knight in shining Armani." The tension between them crackled like a live wire, her sarcasm meeting his overconfidence in a battle of wits. As he moved toward the front of the car, Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to curiosity. As Sarah Evans Holland stood her ground, frustration simmering just beneath the surface, she recalled one of her grandfather's favorite sayings: "Help that humiliates isn't help. It's just an excuse to feed someone's ego." She delivered the sharp remark with precision, her tone cutting like glass. Matthew Jones Coleman, however, appeared unbothered. He chuckled, brushing off her verbal jab as he strolled with exaggerated confidence to the front of her battered Volkswagen Beetle. With a dramatic flourish, as though unveiling some grand mystery, he popped the hood. "This," he said, gesturing toward the engine, "is probably just some minor mechanical nonsense. Looks like a beast to you, but trust me, it's a piece of cake for someone like me." Sarah folded her arms, her sarcasm as thick as the heat rising from the asphalt. "Sure," she drawled, seeing as believing her mock applause was as audible as her skepticism. Matthew leaned into the engine, poking and prodding at a few wires, his self-assurance radiating as brightly as the afternoon sun. But in his attempts to fix the issue, a sudden spark erupted, immediately followed by a deafening bang. A dark, swirling cloud of smoke billowed out, enveloping the two in its acrid embrace. Sarah jumped back, her hands flying to her face as she let out an exasperated gasp. "Oh my God, what did you just do?" she demanded, disbelief and irritation colliding in her voice. She pointed an accusatory finger at the smirking millionaire. You know what my grandpa used to say? Sometimes those who underestimate others end up proving their own shortcomings. Matthew stumbled back, coughing and swiping at the smoke, which now seemed to hang around him like a mocking veil. Desperately attempting to recover, he forced a grin. Not my fault you're driving this piece of junk, he countered, his tone defensive. If you had a car like mine, this sort of thing would never happen. Sarah's glare could have cut steel. She crossed her arms, waiting as the last wisps of smoke dissipated. All right, Mr. Know-It-All, she snapped, her voice steady and cold. Since you just blew up my Beetle, I guess that makes me your responsibility now. We're stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, so you better figure out how to get me out of this mess. Matthew sighed heavily, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in frustration. His regret for stopping in the first place was written all over his face. With a resigned shrug, he motioned toward his sleek green sports car parked a short distance away. Fine, he muttered, his voice tinged with annoyance. Let's go. But don't expect me to open the door for you, all right? Sarah arched an eyebrow, her gaze razor sharp. Her retort came swiftly, her tone laced with mock civility. Relax, she said, her words landing with calculated precision. Your heroism has its limits. I get it. Sarah Evans Holland adjusted her footing, the sharp clicks of her heels against the pavement echoing in the quiet air. Matthew Jones Coleman, his hands stuffed casually into his pockets, ambled beside her, his stride deliberate and unhurried. The faint wisp of smoke rising from the Volkswagen they'd left behind caught his eye, and he couldn't resist a glance back, as though the car itself were mocking his earlier failure. When they reached his polished green Aston Martin, Matthew paused. His gaze settled on Sarah, his expression carrying a familiar blend of mischief and irony. So he began, his voice rich with mock seriousness. Where am I taking you, O damsel in distress? He didn't wait for her reply before adding, or should I drop you off somewhere more? Fitting? Maybe a street where rocking a miniskirt in heels works wonders. Sarah turned to face him slowly, her sharp stare piercing through his veneer of arrogance like a blade. To my job interview, Mr. Know-It-All, she said, her voice as crisp and cutting as the edge of a knife. Matthew raised an eyebrow, glancing at her attire. A job interview, he asked, disbelief dripping from his tone. Dressed like that. Not exactly formal, is it? He chuckled, but the sound died quickly when she didn't join in. Instead, Sarah's response came like a thunderclap. I'm a model, she stated firmly, her voice unwavering. The smirk on Matthew's face faltered for the briefest moment. He recovered quickly, though, his mocking tone creeping back. Well, he said, shrugging, you can't be that in demand if you're driving around in that old Beetle. The words had barely left his lips when Sarah's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, streaming down her cheeks as she choked out her confession. It's my first modeling interview, she said, her voice breaking. It's been my dream forever, even though I'm just a waitress. The weight of her words settled heavily over Matthew. He sighed deeply, his earlier comments now hanging in the air like a reproach. A quiet realization stirred within him. Respect isn't given through words alone, it's earned by seeing another's worth, even through your own blind spots. I'm sorry, he muttered, his voice quieter now, tinged with an unfamiliar awkwardness. I didn't mean it. Sarah lifted her head, her arms crossed in defiance, though a faint, bittersweet smile played on her lips. See, Mr. Know-It-All, she said softly, I'm a beauty with a purpose. The tension between them broke as laughter bubbled up unexpectedly, the shared moment lightening the atmosphere. I'm Matthew Jones Coleman, he said, offering a slight bow with a grin that bordered on self-deprecating. And you, gorgeous. What's your name? Sarah tilted her head, studying him for a moment before replying, Sarah Evans Holland. Matthew nodded, as though weighing her name in his mind. All right, Sarah, I'll take you to your interview. Just give me the address, he hesitated before adding, and for what it's worth, I'm sure they'll hire you. You're the most stunning woman I've ever seen. Sarah's lips curved into a smile as she wiped her tears, preparing to guide him. But before she could speak, a sharp alarm blared from the car's dashboard. Matthew glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "Damn," he muttered. "Someone's breaking into Matthew Mansion." Sarah's eyes widened. "What are you going to do now?" Matthew's smirk returned, tempered now by a glint of determination. "The real question is, what are we going to do? My mansion's close. We're heading there right now." The car roared to life like a beast unchained, pinning Sarah against her seat as Matthew navigated the streets with uncanny precision. She remained silent, her wide eyes fixed on him as she tried to process the sudden shift in their circumstances. Minutes later, they arrived at the mansion. The towering structure loomed against the skyline, its grandeur a stark contrast to the turmoil of the moment. Matthew parked with an air of command, his every movement deliberate. "Stay here," he said firmly, turning to Sarah. "I don't want anything to happen to you." "Why not just call the police?" Sarah countered, her voice rising. "Is it really worth risking your life over things?" Matthew shook his head. "The system alerts me first," he explained. "It's designed that way. I don't involve the police unless I'm certain someone's broken in." He paused, his gaze softening as he took her hand and pressed a reassuring kiss to her knuckles. "I promise I'll be careful," he added, his voice steady. As the security system beeped again, Matthew checked his phone. A wave of relief washed over him when he read the update: "No recent activity. Property secure." "Looks like whoever it was is gone," he said, exhaling deeply. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. "I'm coming with you," she stated. Matthew hesitated, but the determination in her voice left no room for argument. Together, they stepped into the mansion, the faint hum of danger still lingering in the air. Sometimes a promise made in a moment of tension becomes a bond that feels unbreakable. Protecting those you care for is as much about safeguarding your own spirit as it is about ensuring their safety. With a resigned sigh, Matthew Jones, Coleman, and Sarah Evans Holland walked hand in hand toward the grand facade of Matthew Mansion. As they stepped inside, an eerie noise drifted from upstairs, breaking the stillness, a faint yet persistent sound that didn't belong. It was unmistakable crying. The fragile yet piercing sound sent a shiver down their spines. They exchanged startled glances before racing up the marble staircase, their footsteps reverberating in the silence. Reaching the master bedroom, Matthew pushed the door open with purpose. His breath was unsteady, but his resolve was firm. The opulent room, with its velvet curtains and intricately carved furnishings, was dominated by a single, unexpected sight. Resting atop the silk-covered bed was a small basket. Inside it, 3 identical infants wailed, their tiny faces streaked with tears. The babies' cries occasionally broke into fleeting smiles, as if their arrival was the answer they had been waiting for. Sarah stood frozen, her wide eyes filled with astonishment. "Matthew," she whispered, her voice trembling, "are these your children? Where did they come from? And why do they look exactly like you?" Matthew, overwhelmed and visibly shaken, could barely form a reply. I don't know," he stammered, his voice laden with disbelief. Life often delivers mysteries we are unprepared to face, yet the answers come when they are meant to. Matthew's gaze remained fixed on the infants, his confusion giving way to a suffocating uncertainty. After a moment he turned to Sarah, his voice quivering. "I have to choose," he said, his words heavy with emotion. "Do I protect them, or do I uncover the truth? I can't do both." Sarah, still grappling with the surreal scene, took a steadying breath. Her tone was clear, her resolve unwavering. "Matthew, the truth can wait. These children cannot." In a rare moment of vulnerability, Matthew's voice softened. "Will you help me?" he asked, his plea almost a whisper. She nodded slowly, a warm yet determined smile lighting her face. "You're not alone," she assured him. Matthew exhaled deeply, as if releasing a breath he'd held for hours, but concern flickered in his eyes. "What about your job interview, your dream of becoming a model?" Sarah folded her arms, her expression calm yet resolute. "The skirt and heels can wait until tomorrow," she said firmly. "There will be other casting calls, but these babies have only this moment. And I'm here for it." With a nostalgic smile, she added, "My grandfather used to say, the bravest thing you can do is pause your dreams to lend your strength to those who need it most." Then, with a playful glint in her eye, she continued, "Besides, there are 3 of them, Matthew. No way am I leaving you alone with this trio. Unless, of course, you think you're a know-it-all." Matthew chuckled, the weight of the moment briefly lifted by her teasing. "Let's take care of these little ones," Sarah said, leaning over the bassinet to examine the crying infants. Her keen eye quickly sized up the situation. "Matthew," she announced with a smirk, "this is a full-blown disaster zone. These diapers need changing ASAP." She stepped back, waving her hand dramatically to fend off the smell. Matthew recoiled instinctively, grimacing as if the odor physically repelled him. "Changing diapers?" "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, a hint of desperation in his tone. Sarah crossed her arms, her grin equal parts amusement and reassurance. "Relax, genius," she teased. "Even a know-it-all can learn new tricks. But first we need supplies." Her playful tone softened as she continued. "I used to babysit before waiting tables, so trust me, I've got this. But we'll need diapers, formula, bottles, everything. Call someone to deliver them." Matthew raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Diaper delivery? That's not exactly standard where I'm from." "Well, Mr. Millionaire, this is San Francisco," she quipped. "I'm sure you have contacts who can deliver caviar at a moment's notice." Not long after, the supplies arrived, and Sarah sprang into action with an efficiency that left Matthew both impressed and bewildered. Together, they began tending to the triplets. As the babies gradually settled, a peaceful calm enveloped the room. "These little ones have quite the appetite," Matthew observed, fumbling with a bottle. "It's like they're already in charge." When the feeding was done, Sarah prepared a warm bath for the infants. Matthew hesitantly joined in, his awkwardness a stark contrast to her practiced ease. As they removed the baby's tiny clothes, something unusual caught their attention: a small birthmark on one baby's lower back. Matthew's face paled as he examined the other 2. The identical markings left him frozen, a chill coursing through him. Sarah noticed immediately. "Matthew," she asked, her voice tinged with concern, "what's wrong?" He swallowed hard, the weight of realization sinking in. Slowly, he unbuttoned his shirt, revealing his own back. Turning slightly, he pointed to the exact same spot. "Look," he said, his voice heavy with gravity. "It's the Coleman family birthmark." Sarah Evans Holland gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth in disbelief. "So there's no question about it," she said softly, her voice tinged with shock. "They look exactly like you because they are yours." Matthew Jones Coleman stood still, his face unreadable as Sarah continued, her tone now playful despite the gravity of the situation. "Well, Matthew," she teased gently, "it seems you managed to get someone pregnant, and she decided to leave your kids right here at Matthew Mansion." Her attempt to lighten the mood did little to ease the tension. Matthew's expression darkened, his features hardening into a mask of stoic determination. "That's impossible," he stated, his voice clipped and tense. Sarah arched an eyebrow, clearly sensing his unease. "Impossible," she echoed, a sarcastic edge in her tone. "What, did you have some foolproof plan of protection?" Matthew didn't immediately respond. His gaze dropped to the floor as if searching for the words he needed. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and raw. "Because I'm sterile." The confession lingered in the air, unguarded and heavy. Sarah froze, her lips parted as though forming a response, but no words came. The silence that followed felt suffocating, filled with unspoken emotions. Sterility isn't just physical, Sarah reflected silently. It's a challenge of the soul, forcing people to wrestle with the fragility of their beliefs and the uncertainty of their legacy. She exhaled deeply, as though trying to steady her thoughts, and finally looked up, her expression calm but resolute. "We need to check the footage," she said, her voice firm. "Maybe you'll recognize whoever brought them here." Matthew shook his head and sighed. "Let's focus on the babies first," he said quietly. "Once we're done, we'll deal with the rest." His voice carried a steadiness that belied his weariness. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. The immediate needs of the tiny, fragile infants left little room for hesitation. As they worked together to care for the triplets, Sarah's practiced confidence stood in sharp contrast to Matthew's hesitancy. She teased him gently as he nervously held one of the babies. "Matthew, it's not fine china," she said with a grin. "He won't break, I promise." Her reassuring tone seemed to settle his nerves. Matthew adjusted his grip on the baby, though his hands remained careful, almost reverent. "Are you sure these little ones don't come with a manual?" he asked nervously. "I feel like I'm messing up every second." Sarah chuckled, sliding the infant in the warm water of the bath. "Relax," she said lightly. "Babies are more resilient than your fragile ego." Once the babies were bathed, they wrapped them in soft towels and laid them gently in their basket. Sarah leaned close, her voice soothing as she whispered, "Sleep, little ones. Love is waiting for you. In your dreams, the deepest truths are written." Later in the security room, Matthew powered up the surveillance system. The glow from the monitors illuminated their faces as they watched the footage. On the screen, a woman appeared. Her dark hood and scarf obscured most of her face, but her movements were deliberate and sure. She carried the basket, the triplets cradled within it, as she entered through a side door. The recording showed her navigating the halls of Matthew Mansion with practiced ease. Finally arriving at the master bedroom, she gently placed the basket on the bed, but then she did something unexpected. From her bag, she retrieved a document and held it up to the camera. Matthew and Sarah leaned closer, straining to make out the bold text at the top of the page. "Pure Love Fertility Clinic Donor Registry." The clinic's logo stood prominently beside the heading. Matthew's eyes narrowed as he muttered, "What on earth?" The woman held the document steady for several moments, ensuring every detail was captured on camera. Then, without hesitation, she exited the room and disappeared from the footage. "Do you know that clinic?" Sarah asked softly, breaking the silence. Matthew didn't respond right away. His gaze remained fixed on the screen as if willing it to offer answers. Clarity, he realized, could be as unsettling as ignorance, exposing truths he wasn't ready to face. After a long pause, Matthew straightened and walked to the door. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "Unfortunately, I do. But this isn't a story I can tell sober. Let's go to the living room." He glanced at Sarah, whose steady presence seemed to anchor him. Together they walked down the hall, their steps measured but heavy with the weight of the unfolding mystery. Matthew Jones Coleman walked toward the living room, his stride deliberate and his face heavy with tension. Every step seemed burdened with thoughts he had tried for years to suppress. Behind him, Sarah Evans Holland followed in silence, reading the weight in his every movement. The softly lit room, adorned with minimalist decor, exuded a quiet calm, an ironic setting for what felt like a storm brewing. It seemed the perfect backdrop for a confession that could unravel everything. Without a word, Matthew poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Sarah. She accepted it, her curiosity evident, though she didn't take a sip. Matthew, however, downed a long gulp, as though the burn might steel him for the words he was about to say. "A few years ago," he began, setting the glass on the sleek coffee table, "I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. It wasn't life-threatening, but the treatment involved chemotherapy and some brutal medications. They warned me I'd likely become infertile." He paused, his voice catching slightly. It was devastating. Sarah settled into the sofa across from him, her expression a mix of empathy and anticipation. On my doctor's recommendation, I decided to freeze my sperm before starting treatment, Matthew continued, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. The clinic I went to was a morpuro. He hesitated, as if grappling with the enormity of what he was about to say. After the treatment, I found out I was indeed infertile, but I didn't destroy the samples. I'm not even sure why. Maybe I was holding on to some small, irrational hope for a different future. Sarah nodded, her understanding evident in the warmth of her gaze. She spoke softly, her words careful. So how do you think those babies ended up here? Matthew exhaled deeply, his hands rubbing his temples as if the act might help him unravel the mystery. Finally, he lifted his eyes to Sarah, anguish etched across his face. It must have been a mistake at the clinic. An accidental implantation, he said, his tone almost disbelieving. My sample must have been used in the wrong procedure. Maybe the woman didn't know. She might have been trying to conceive with a specific donor, maybe even her partner. But when the babies were born and they didn't resemble the man she expected, she must have realized something was wrong. Sarah let his words settle, the weight of them palpable in the room. She spoke carefully, her voice threading reason with compassion. How could you prove something like that? Matthew leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor, as though it might yield answers. The clinic has to have records details about the procedures, the samples they used, he said. That's the only way to piece this together. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Sarah's gentle smile. It was a small gesture, but it carried a warmth that seemed to dispel some of the tension. As my grandfather used to say, she began, in a situation as uncertain as this, the value we'll find in seeking answers is directly tied to the courage we bring to the journey. Matthew looked up, meeting her steady gaze. The calm she exuded was like a balm to his fraying nerves. Let's hope your grandfather also had advice for what to do once we have those answers, he said, his attempt at humor tinged with a faint, genuine smile. For now, he added, his tone lighter but still weary, let's grab something to eat before the triplets wake up again, screaming for their bottles. Order something for delivery, Sarah suggested, leaning back slightly. But keep it light. I've got to maintain this supermodel figure. Her playful remark elicited a laugh from Matthew, and for a brief moment, the storm clouds that had gathered around them seemed to part. As dawn broke, Matthew Jones Coleman, weary but resolute, reached for his phone. His tired eyes, sharpened by determination, locked on the task at hand. He dialed the number of a reputable private detective agency, intent on unraveling the mystery surrounding the fertility center. After providing a concise summary of the situation, he assured the agency he would send the necessary recordings and documents promptly. The agency, in turn, guaranteed to treat the matter with utmost priority and discretion. Without hesitation, Matthew made another call, this time summoning his trusted lawyer to the mansion.